the major forts and fortlets through there. So in 1975, if you're looking at the state of knowledge, there were certain overarching themes that you might say. First of all, the length of the wall is 38 miles. It was built for Antoninus Pius about 142 AD. There was a brief moment when it was abandoned, about 2 years maybe in the early 160s, and then it was reoccupied until 185 or so AD. The major feature of the linear monument, which is a defensive barrier, was a rampart made of turf with a stone base. The stone base 4.3 meters wide. In front of that, there was a huge ditch, some 12 feet deep, which is twice the size of the ditch on Hadrian's Wall, the lesser known of the two Roman frontiers. It was believed there were 17 forts along the Antonine Wall. Only 15 of them were known in 1975. And I do recall when I first came to this part of the world in 1984, someone asking me where the missing two were. And you think, did you hear you ask yourself that question? If we knew where they were, they wouldn't be missing. And then on top of the forts, there were also a series of fortlets, which would be called mile castles on Hadrian's Wall. So very, very basic stuff. And you'd think that basic stuff would be right, wouldn't you? Because it's so basic. Since then, of course, the evidence base has expanded. We've done a number of excavations. We have new techniques at our command, including LiDAR, resistivity, magnetometry, various other things. The study of finds, in particular pottery, has advanced considerably. And of course, our interpretation goes along with those advances. And when I say our interpretation, it's also the fact that we now admit what we don't know. We're not politicians. So here's a good example of the evidence base. This shows something which excavated in 1961 by Kenneth Steer of the Royal Commission. What he found was a timber building with a stone flagged floor. Yeah. He found evidence for heavy burning, a lot of charcoal. You'll see the oxidation on the clay and the stone, indicating an intense conflagration. And this is where the interpretation then comes in. He said this showed that the enemy had successfully stormed the fort and torched it. That's stretching it a wee bit. It could be an accidental fire, couldn't it? However, we re-excavated this. It's in someone's garden, excavated in 1986. It turned out that this structure was a Roman oven. That might account for the burning. So the oven is in the top right of that image now. And in the foreground, Kenneth Steer also found part of the boulder area. Well, it turns out that that boulder area is the paving within a huge timber building. And you'll see along the left-hand side, there's a building slot with a series of post holes. These people are standing in those massive post holes. So the oven was inside a huge timber building, which wasn't recognized in 1961. So you can see the problems we have with the evidence. Even worse, the original excavation, which was a trench some 6 feet wide and 150 feet long, was only recorded in 5 sentences. There were no photographs and no drawings. So it's really difficult to reinterpret someone else's ideas when you're dealing with that. This is the kind of thing we're dealing with normally. You put in a tiny little trench, you find a negative feature, in this case, a ditch, and then you put in another trench further in the field and hope you're joining the same dots together, that you found the same ditch. And by and large, these days, we are pretty good at that. But if you look at this section, you can see halfway up on the right-hand side there, there's a band of orange. That band of orange is a lining of clay because this dirty, muddy ditch was what we would call an aqueduct. See, if you're in Mediterranean, aqueducts have got wonderful stone arches and stuff like that. An aqueduct in Scotland is a muddy ditch with a clay lining. So sometimes your terminology can also be a problem. This is at Caradon Roman Fort, and we followed the aqueduct into the south gate of the fort. So we're pretty confident about that. So let's go back to our list of known details. The Antonine Wall is 38 miles long. It starts at Old Kilpatrick on the Clyde, and it goes through to Bridgeness on the Forth. This is Bridgeness Tower. The windmill Craig, as it was called. The windmill was built in 1750. Here in 1869, the Bridgeness tablet, one of the distance stones, was found, and therefore the Antonine Wall had to end here. They then drew the line of the Antonine Wall on the Ordnance Survey maps. Remember that big ditch I was talking about? Well, it went straight through a Bronze Age burial, which was still there. You cannot have an earlier burial in a later ditch. So even then, there was something wrong with that concept. We did an excavation here in 1987, and we showed that the Antonine Wall wasn't to the right of that tower. So people said, well, it must be to the left of the tower. And before they built that new big drum that you can see onto the tower there, that's an extension to the house, we excavated that and showed the Antonine Wall wasn't there either. And this is the problem, is that people try and tweak the existing theories instead of just completely rejecting them. And so the point is, we do not know anymore how long the Antonine Wall is. It could be 39 miles, it could be 37 miles. That's pretty basic. This is a replica of the Bridgeness tablet, and this is, as I say, is why people ended the wall originally at Bridgeness Tower. It's almost 9 feet long, so it's huge. However, Roman stones travel. There is no reason why this stone should not have been used in a later structure. We actually excavated where the tablet was found, and found that it was on top of a medieval road. Again, definitely not in place. If you were to say that wherever you found a Roman distance tablet for the Antonine Wall with the line of the Antonine Wall, it would go through Aberdeen, it would go through Donator, it would go through Chicago. So clearly there's a problem with theory. This is for you. Roman centurions, of course, turn up when we're opening these things. And in the background, you've got the Forth. So you can see why they thought there was a possibility of the wall ending here. A mile further to the east is Caradon Roman Fort on the Forth itself. It's the obvious place to terminate the wall. So you're going to have the wall maybe an extra mile long. Currently, the last place where we have found it due to excavation is in the town centre, more or less, of Bowness at Richmond Corner, quite close to Bowness Hospital. And this was an excavation in the chapel grounds. So what you see in this photograph going from left to right is the stone base of the linear rampart. We've tried to find it further to the east. We think we may have found the ditch, but it's really difficult to get a decent sized trench in any of these things. So the distance, we don't know. The dating is even worse, because we now no longer believe that there was a gap in the occupation. And that was based on the idea that if you have a timber building in a fort and you replace it, it's been replaced because the previous one had been abandoned. Well, that's not true. It can be replaced because the wood has rotted, it could be replaced because there's an accidental fire, or because there's a change in use of the building. So we've got rid of that idea, and the study of Roman pottery, and particularly the coins, has shown that the Antonine Wall was probably abandoned shortly after 160 AD. So that's 20 years less than we'd previously thought. It's one generation. I mean, you can imagine the people who built the wall were the people who are dismantling it some 20 odd years later. In terms of the Roman coinage, we got schedule monument consent from Historic Scotland to detect on the site of Mumriel's Roman fort. and at Carridon. And as a result of our excavations, we came up with just under 40 Roman coins over the last 20 years in the Falkirk district alone. 40 doesn't sound a lot. There are only 150 from the entire Antonine Wall altogether. So 40 is a significant addition to that. So the Antonine Wall was built of turf. That's what the Roman historians tell us. It was a cespititious wall. However, George MacDonald thought that the eastern end of the wall was actually made of an earth core retained by clay cheeks. And that's what this reconstruction drawing shows, because that's what we found on all of my early excavations, very clearly signed that that was what was happening. Turns out I got it wrong. And this is what happens with archaeology. You're dependent upon the evidence. We were excavating the very, very vestigial remnants of the structure above the stone base. Once we got better evidence, we were able to change our minds. So this is an excavation we did, and you'll see from the face mask there, just as we were coming out of COVID. It was in the middle of July. It rained torrentially every day for the 6 days we were there. We were really pissed off. It was fantastic because it kept the soil colors. And I hope you can see very, very clearly the pale bluish gray clay, which turns out not to be pale blue clay. When we had it analyzed by Edinburgh University, it's turf. And this is the problem. We're looking at things on a microscopic level. They can look at them at a microscopic level and give you a more definitive answer. But basically what you're seeing on this image is going from on bottom, there's a diagonal line. If I can get there. Yes, if you look at the arrow on the screen, that is the south edge of the rampart. And that's what usually ends the rampart. Inside that, you've also got some bluish clay blocks, which turn out to be individual turfs. And what we did here in Lauriston is we excavated down through the rampart at different levels, and we recorded, we photographed, and we drew each level. Normally, when you're looking through a feature like a rampart, you just section it and you look in the section. That's not the way you should be doing it. So what you can see going up and down, you've got the south curb of the Antonine Wall. So the rampart going up and down here. And then inside that, on the right-hand side of the image, individual turfs. So you can measure the size of the turf. More importantly, you can measure the orientation, because we always assumed that you put the turfs at right angles to the wall in the two directions. What we found as a result of our excavations here, and then looking back at the earlier records, is in point of fact, the turf lines go diagonally to the wall. So you can see here, particularly on the upper levels, the walls going up and down, the turfs are going at an angle to that, and then the next layer goes at right angles to that on top, and right angles and right angles. So you're knitting the whole structure together, and you're making it hugely more stronger than if you were just doing it at the right angles. And then you're sheathing the whole lot in special turf, which is dug from a clay subsoil. So it sheds the water. You've probably noticed it rains occasionally in this part of the world. Having a turf structure, getting damp, makes it soggy and it collapses. Putting the good quality clay turfs on the outside sheds that water. The Roman technology in turf is far superior to what we realized. And the great thing about getting Edinburgh University involved, of course, is that they can tell you whether it's sheep or cattle that were grazing the turf when it was being cut. And I'll leave you to read the book to find the answer to that. Okay, so it's not 38 miles long. Yes, it is built of turf, but well built of turf. What depth is the ditch? 12 feet according to tradition. Well, you see the two people with the lower ranging pole on this photograph. That ranging pole is 12 feet. You'll see there's another ranging pole on the higher level. That's another 6 feet. That's an 18-foot deep ditch. And why did we not know that? Because no idiot has bothered to dig the whole ditch before. And we were doing this because the roads department were putting a roundabout in. And in fact, the roads department lent us two labourers who swore they'd never worked so hard in their lives as when they were doing an archaeological dig. So what you normally do when you dig the ditch is you dig the top bit, you find the angle of the sides and you extrapolate. But you'll see on this photograph that the ditch sides get steeper as you go down into the ditch, and you've got the extra 6 feet as a result of that. In the bottom of the ditch, there's a square-shaped slot, and that traditionally is said to be an ankle breaking slot. The idea being, if you're the enemy, you're trying to cross the ditch, you've got this steep-sided thing, and you twist your ankle as you're trying to cross it. What kind of idiot would go into a ditch and not jump across the last bit? You know, that slot is only a foot wide. There's no way you'd break your ankle on that. Also, look at this photograph. That's gravel. That's loose. When it rains, it comes down in cascades. If you'd got a square-shaped slot, it wouldn't be square for long. What we now think is that that slot was dug and then they put an entanglement in, barbed wire, the equivalent of, and then they backfill the slot immediately, which is why it keeps its shape. So it's an extra part of the linear defense. And in fact, that's what we've now realized is the wall, in terms of passive defense, is the height of technology and a combination of various systems. So depth of the ditch, wrong. 17 forts, well, we can now fill in where at least one of those missing ones was, and that's at Falkirk. This is the Ordnance Survey map of the Antonine Wall, and it shows the red blob of the Roman fort at Falkirk on Arnott Hill, quarter of a mile away from where we found it in 1991. It is actually more or less in the town centre, and from the ditches that you see in the foreground of this photograph, you can see Falkirk Steeple. So it's in the Pleasance area. And from being unknown, it's now one of the better known forts and featured in a television program, badly. So not only do we have an idea of where the fort is and its position and size, we also have this wonderful piece of pottery with an inscription carved on it, so we can tell you the name of one of the soldiers who was based in Falkirk. And that kind of makes it slightly more personal when you can say the individual's name. We have not been able to dig inside the fort, but we've dug all around the fort, and we've even found the construction yard for when they were building the fort. Where they were making the ironmongery, where they were making the tiles, and this is a tile kiln. You see on the bottom of the photograph, the tile kiln has been cut through by the Romans when they put one of the fort ditches in. So this predates the fort. It's part of the building of the fort. The tiles, of course, used for the roof of the granary so that it would be fireproof. And joining all our dots together for the fort at Falkirk, we can now come up with a ground plan. We know that the fort was just over 2 acres in size and it had annexes on either side. The annexes are for industrial use as well as storage. Oddly enough, you can see in the center of the plan there is the Adrian Bowling Club. And we asked for permission to dig that up, and the greensman said yes, but it was the fact that he was laughing at the time made us think maybe he wasn't being serious. So when you see reconstruction drawings of forts on the Antonine Wall, it used to be traditional to show the annex empty. Maybe put a few horses in there, maybe some cattle for grazing. And yet we realized that a lot of the old excavations came up with streets in the annexes, which suggested they should be full of buildings. When we produced this reconstruction drawing of Rough Castle, we were heavily criticized because we were misleading the public. We put loads of buildings in the annex. Our response was, you're misleading people by showing nothing there. So what's the difference? We've now excavated in annexes many, many times, and you never not come across timber buildings. They are jam-packed full of material. Here's a good example from the fort at Falkirk, the ground plan of an aisled building from the West Annex. I hope you can see it consists of a series of post holes. So all these P numbers are posts which are they're dug 1.5 meters into the ground. So if the bottom of the post is 1.5 meters into the ground, that's a huge telegraph-sized pole going up the way. And the kind of building we're looking at is this. In the center of that one, there was an iron smelting kiln. These are barn-like structures, never before discovered in Scotland. They are the industrial buildings of the Roman period. Very common in the south of England, and now we've found 6 in the Falkirk district alone. So advance in terms of our understanding of the annexes, but also in the supply of the Roman army. Back in 1975, J.P. Gilham came up with an idea about how the Antonine Wall evolved. It's known as the Gilham hypothesis. And you'll see from this slide that the top one shows the first idea is that you have forts every 6 to 8 miles, just as you have on Hadrian's Wall. So it's a copy of Hadrian's Wall. So if it's a copy of Hadrian's Wall, you should have mile castles at mile intervals between those. And here, because we're odd, we call them fortlets. Fortlets were already known on the Antonine Wall, but not enough. As a result of his idea, they went out and they discovered new fortlets, Lawrence Keppie and Jim Walker, at Kinneil and Seabegs and at Somerston. Bill Hanson went out and discovered one at Croy as well. So we've discovered quite a number of fortlets since then, but not enough to confirm this hypothesis. But people are wedded to this idea. And if you find evidence that negates it, they try to negate your evidence. So archaeologists are wonderful. They all have their pet ideas. And that's where I think our great advancements has come in, is that we know each other's idiosyncrasies and problems. So the last idea, of course, is that the fortlets were done away with and they put in smaller forts in their stead. And this is the problem when you're looking at the forts on the Antonine Wall. You say there are 17, but you've got them ranging from 8 acres down to 1.5 acres. They're not comparable. They're pears and oranges. So this is what a reconstruction drawing of one of those fortlets looks like. This is based on the excavations at Kinneil, as I say, discovered by Keppie and Walker. And the latest one that was discovered was actually at Rough Castle using resistivity. So you see where the red circle is there, that shows the location of the new fort. So the big gap down the center here, this is the ditch of the Antonine Wall, which you can't take a big handcart down to do the resistivity. These 2 lines here, that's the Antonine Wall. And then you've got the Roman road going through across the fortlet because it was abandoned at a later date. And we already knew from the excavations at Kinneil that the fortlets were abandoned. So they are very much an early part of the occupation of the Antonine Wall, and the Roman road then gets chucked through the center of them. So from not really knowing that there were fortlets to knowing there were fortlets to knowing that they were abandoned to know that the road goes right across them. Evolution of ideas as we go along. One of the major changes to our understanding of the wall comes from this excavation in Calendar Park, February. You can see the frost on the ground, the dog standing guard duty. But in the foreground of this slide, you've got the base of the Antonine Wall going from left to right. In front of that, you've got the berm. So that's the bit between the rampart and the ditch. Down the bottom, you've got the ditch. And beyond that, you've got the upcast mound with a gravel pit. But on the berm, you can see there's a series of discolorations. So just here, 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 and here. And those turned out on excavation to be defensive pits. So I'm sure you're familiar with the famous Lilia at Rough Castle, which are basically minefields. So you have a pit, you have a sharpened spike in it, you cover it with bracken or something like that. You stand on the bracken and you skewer yourself on the spike. So they're fantastic. That's what we thought we had here. It turns out we have something actually that Caesar calls chippy, spelled Cippi. And I rather like the idea of Italian chippies in Falkirk. So this is how we initially reconstructed them. Sorry about the sound effect there. And you can see a formidable addition to the defense. And this, of course, is a reconstruction of the well-known siege of Alesia by Caesar, where he's using all sorts of different features to do the same kind of thing. So the ones in the middle, the kind of tops of branches where they bifurcate and they come out, that's what we're looking at on the Antonine wall. 2 years after we found them on the Antonine wall, they found them on Hadrian's wall. Isn't that great? We got there first. No one believed us, but we found them. We know they go 38 miles, whole length of the wall. Yeah, so that is a major difference in our understanding of the wall. Doesn't stop there though, because this slide is at Castle Carey. You can see the stone feature going left to right in the middle of the screen. That's on the southern lip of the ditch. There was actually a wall at the top of the ditch. So if I show that in section, this is our now understanding of the wall. If you're coming from the barbarian side, which is where we are now, we're in the barbarian country here. So you come from up here, you've got the upcast, which is the material dug out of the ditch. The northern side of the upcast is retained by the stone wall. You have to climb over that. You go over the upcast, and then there's a massive wall on the inside of the upcast. So that means if you get to the ditch, it's kind of hard to get back, and you've got a killing zone in front of the wall. You then go into the ditch, which is now 18 feet, so not 12 feet deep. At the bottom of the ditch, you've got an entanglement, you've got the barbed wire, so it's hard to jump over that. You climb up the other side of the ditch, and at the top lip here, there's a dry stone dike, vertical wall, which makes it hard to climb out of the ditch. Even worse, you try to do that, that wall will tumble down on top of you because it's not solid. So it's a trap. Then you've got the defensive pits on the berm. So those are the tops of trees, the branches coming out the way, tied together, so that it's like a barbed wire fence, hard to get through. That's before you even get to the rampart, where there are watchtowers and people observing your approach. We also now know from the work on Hadrian's Wall that just here between the dry stone dike and the first of those defensive pits, there would be a low mound so that you can't crawl underneath the barbed wire. This is a really seriously thought out system and completely changes our comprehension of the wall. So I'll leave you on that in terms of the wall, and I'll just jump forward a few years. In 1930, a coin hoard, still the largest Roman coin hoard from Scotland, 2,000 silver coins were discovered, or roughly 2,000, because it was discovered by a council worker whilst he was digging some sand out. So there may have been a few more coins originally. The last coin dated to 230 AD, so that's post the Antonine Wall. And this is the replacement for the Antonine Wall. So instead of building an expensive wall, maintaining an expensive army, you bribe the locals. You say, dinner, come down to Hadrian's Wall, we'll give you money. And the one thing that all the coins, 2,000 coins from the 1st century BC to the 3rd century AD have in common is they have high silver content. They're not interested in the face value. They're interested in jewelry, melting it down. And again, although this coin hoard was found in 1930, that theory of the bribery and the payment was quite a lot later in date. So it's interpretation, understanding. Also, we have to think in terms of protection of the Antonine Wall. World Heritage Site in 2008, tourism, long distance footpaths, everything has changed. Antonine Wall is just typical of any monument in Scotland, but on a bigger scale, and it's in Falkirk district. Thank you very much.